You're listening to the quiet before an engine wakes. A stillness so complete you can almost hear the frost settling on the hull, layering itself over black-painted steel. The night is thin, stretched across the Belgian woods like a sheet of cold glass. Somewhere in the distance, a barn door creaks. Somewhere else, a dog barks once and goes silent. And here, in this clearing lit only by a faint sliver of moon, a tank waits with the patience of an animal that knows what morning will demand. Before you drift off, take a moment to subscribe, but only if stories told in whispers are your kind of thing. And tell us where you're listening from, or which image lingers with you the most. You're listening to Echoes of War. You stand beside it, gloved hands barely brushing the metal. It is colder than the air, colder than the dirt, colder than the doubt the men who tend it have carried farther than any machine should have to go. You breathe in, and you can smell oil and iron, and old smoke that never fully leaves the seams of armor. Inside, for men rest in the dark, their breaths rising in tiny ghost clouds. One shifts his weight, a soft grunt muffled by steel. Another murmurs something in his sleep, a name, maybe, or a memory that doesn't quite let go. The gunner keeps one hand on the breech even now, an unconscious habit born from months of training in places where the heat was punishing and the welcome uncertain. The driver curls against the wall, blanket pulled to his chin, boots still on. These men belong to a battalion that many doubted should even exist. You might not know their names yet. Not all of them will enter the history books, but their story is already moving quietly toward you, like a slow tide in winter. In a tent a few yards away, their commander sits awake. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, posture straight, hands still, eyes following the faint glow of a lantern as if studying its tremble for answers. He hasn't slept much. He rarely does before major operations. Papers lie scattered near his knee. Fuel reports, weather bulletins, orders from higher command written in the clipped precision of men who will never feel the mud or the fear or the heat inside a tank turret. He hears the same silence you feel now and knows it won't last. Because somewhere beyond the tree line, behind the fog that drifts low and shapeless over the ground, the war is stirring. Engines rumble in distant valleys. Radios hiss, and men in grey coats check their rifles, whispering orders in a language edged by exhaustion. But tonight, for a moment, everything is still. You take one step closer to the tank. Your breath fogs the air. The steel doesn't reflect your face. It only reflects the cold. You might wonder, standing here, what courage means in weather like this. Whether it's something loud, like speeches and flags, or something quieter, like staying steady when the world has given you every reason to walk away. For the men of the 761st Tank Battalion, courage was carved in silence long before they reached this forest, long before they crossed the ocean, long before General Patton, rough-voiced and skeptical, agreed to send them into battle. This black unit had fought 2 wars at once, the one in Europe and the one woven into the very soil of the country they served. They had trained under a sun that burned the Louisiana dust into their boots. They had endured insults sharper than shrapnel. They had outperformed expectations designed to keep them from rising. And when they proved themselves again and again, doors opened only an inch at a time. Yet here they were, and you stand with them now, on the edge of a moment that will define them. A faint breeze moves across the clearing. It carries a smell of pine, diesel, and the distant smoke of villages battered by months of fighting. The sky above seems heavy, like it's holding its breath. Frost blooms along the edges of the treads, delicate crystals forming where heat and pressure will soon return. Inside the tank, one of the crew stirs fully awake. Sergeant Ruben Rivers, though you won't hear his name whispered yet. He blinks into the dark, Listening to the heartbeat of the machine, he knows better than most men know their homes. His fingers brush the metal once. A ritual, a promise. You listen with him. You wait with him. Because dawn is coming. And with it, the battalion's first step into the fire. A step that history will remember only in fragments, unless someone chooses to gather them, gently, and tell the story the way it deserves to be told. This night, this breath, this stillness before the engine turns. This is where their story begins. Chapter 1. The Long Road to a Uniform. Dust and distance. You hear it before you see it, the long, low hum of heat bending the air over Louisiana soil, a place where summer feels endless, and even the breeze carries the weight of old stories. You stand beside a road carved through red dust, the surface shimmering as if it's not entirely real. A train whistle calls in the distance, thin, lonely, stretched by the heat. The year is 1942, though the landscape holds centuries inside it. The men who step off the train carry duffel bags, helmets, and the quiet determination of those who have already learned to fight for space in their own country. Some walk with straight backs, refusing to let the stares from nearby soldiers touch them. Others keep their eyes fixed on the horizon, as if imagining a different future somewhere beyond the fields. They are here for one reason: to become part of something the Army never truly expected to succeed. The 761st Tank Battalion, soon to be known as the Black Panthers. You watch them adjust their caps, wipe sweat from their necks, and look toward the camp that will shape them. The dust rises behind their steps like a curtain closing on the world they left behind. Heat presses against you. Sweat beads at your temples. And even though you're only observing, you can almost feel what they feel, the weight of hope, of fear, of the unknown. A sign stands near the road. Its paint is chipped. Its letters blunt. Colored troops, this way. The men read it without stopping. Not because it doesn't matter, but because this road is one they've walked in many ways before, through restaurants, neighborhoods, schools, factories. 1,000 quiet separations, now folded into a government-issued instruction. Still, they walk, and the air hums around them, holding the first hint of something that will change the shape of history, even if very few people will notice it happening. Training under the unseen weight. At the camp, tanks sit in long rows like beasts sleeping in the sun. Steel bodies warming under the sky. Tracks glinting. Engines ticking softly as mechanics move between them with wrenches and cloths. You stand near the shade of a mess hall and watch as the new recruits approach the motor pool for the first time. Some freeze for a beat, just a moment, taking in the scale of what waits for them. Others smile, quiet and almost private. A tank is more than a machine. It is a room where trust must be absolute, a space no bigger than a pantry that will become a home, a shield, and sometimes a tomb. The instructors call the men forward. Their voices are clipped, official, rigid. Some speak with respect, others with suspicion thinly covered by professionalism. In this place, competence is expected, excellence is demanded. But acceptance is not guaranteed. You hear the engines start, one after another, their vibrations sinking into the ground, into your shoes, into your breath. The air thickens with diesel and dust. The heat rises in waves. And day after day, from dawn until the sun slips behind the pines, the men train. They learn to load shells with the speed of instinct, to navigate tight turns while blind to everything but the commander's voice, to fire the 75mm gun with precision even when sweat stings their eyes, to work as a single body inside a cramped turret where mistakes have no space to land. Every drill is a test. Every test is watched more closely than those given to other units, because in the eyes of many, these men must not only prove they can fight the enemy, they must prove, unfairly, unjustly, that they deserve the right to fight at all. You watch them push through it. Watch as they swallow insults. Watch as they excel. There is no bitterness in their movements, only purpose. And beneath that purpose, something deeper, a quiet defiance born from years of being told what they could not do. The commander who saw them. Late in the afternoon, when the sun turns orange and the shadows lengthen, you notice one man walking along the line of parked tanks. His steps are measured, his gaze direct. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates. He's not a dramatic figure, no loud presence, no theatrical gestures. But there is steadiness in him, a rare kind, shaped not by speeches but by conviction. He stops beside a group of trainees covered in sweat and dust. He speaks to them quietly. You can't hear the words, but you can see the effect. Shoulders straighten, jaws unclench, a few even smile, small but sincere. Bates fought to keep this battalion, fought bureaucrats, skepticism, and direct pressure from officers who believed black soldiers could not, would not, should not crew armored vehicles. But Bates had seen something in them, discipline, hunger, potential, and he refused to let the Army's prejudice carve away the battalion's future. You watch him move between the tanks as the sky dims. He checks bolts, treads, elevation mechanisms. He bends close to peer under a bogey wheel. He listens to the way a new driver shifts gears as he backpacks the tank into position. His presence tells the men, "You belong here," not because someone granted permission, but because they earned it. As he walks past you, the wind carries a few words that drift across the yard. "We will be ready." And in that moment, you believe him. The sound of earning respect. Night training begins after sunset. The Louisiana sky grows heavy with humidity. Crickets pulse rhythmically in the fields. A faint smell of rain hangs over the camp, even when the sky remains clear. You watch from a hill as a column of tanks moves across the dark terrain, their silhouettes enormous and ghost-like. Searchlights sweep in slow arcs. Engines grumble like distant thunder. Inside each tank, the crew works without rest. The gunner adjusts elevation by touch alone. The loader breathes in time with the commander's orders. The driver keeps one hand steady on the brake lever, the other poised on the gear stick. And something begins to shift. A few white officers from neighboring units come to observe. Some cross their arms, expecting failure. Others lean forward when they see none. The tanks move with precision. Not perfect, not yet, but disciplined, confident, focused. One by one, the skepticism falters. Quietly, unwillingly, but undeniably. You can feel it, a change in the air, subtle but real. Respect is not given. Not here. Not in 1942. Not easily, not freely, not without resistance. Respect is earned, and the 761st earns it more each night. Even if the Army writes different words on paper, the ground itself seems to understand who these men are becoming. Isolation and resolve. Days blur into weeks, weeks into months, summer into winter, and with every season the battalion sharpens. But the world around them remains divided. Dining halls separate them. Buses segregate them. Local towns welcome some soldiers and turn away others. You walk past a row of cots in a barracks lit by a single bulb. The men lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking of home, thinking of the country they love, thinking of the war they want to fight, not because they crave violence, but because they crave justice. Sometimes, you hear laughter drifting from the mess tent. Exhausted, genuine laughter, the kind that floats up only after surviving another day of drills. Sometimes, you hear muttered frustration. Sometimes, silence heavier than anything spoken. But always, beneath it all, you sense something unbreakable. They know they are ready. They know what they are capable of. They know the battlefield will be the only place where judgment will be honest, where steel, mud, and fire cannot lie. The order finally comes. It happens on a morning brushed with cold. Fog clings to the ground. The sun hangs low, pale and uncertain. A messenger runs across the yard, boots splashing through puddles left by the night's rain. Orders in hand. You're close enough to see Bates read them. Slow, steady, absorbing every word with a calm expression that hides the storm beneath. Then he looks up, and for the first time, you see something flicker in his eyes, something between relief and resolve. The battalion has been cleared for deployment. Europe awaits. The war awaits. The proving ground no one wanted to give them now opens. You watch as the men gather around him, their breaths hanging like mist, their faces a mix of pride and something far quieter, the knowledge that history has begun to turn. The engines start. The tanks rumble. The dust rises. And the long road that began in discrimination now leads toward a different kind of battle, one fought under foreign skies, where ability, not prejudice, will decide their fate. You feel the vibration in your chest. You feel the air change. You feel the story beginning to shift. The 761st is moving, and the world is about to learn their name. Chapter 2. Crossing the Ocean of Doubt. Before the water opens. You hear the engines long before you see the ship. A deep vibration hums across the port, rattling crates, stirring gulls from lampposts, and shivering through the metal ramps that lead toward the waiting vessel. The air smells of salt and coal smoke, a sharp contrast to the red dust the men of the 761st have breathed for months. You stand with them on the pier, watching as their tanks, the machines that have become their homes, their responsibilities, their burdens, roll up into the vast hull of the transport ship. The ramps tremble under the weight, groaning softly with every movement. Some of the men rest their hands on the steel as it passes, almost like saying goodbye to a part of themselves. Others keep their arms crossed, trying to hold in the swirl of emotion that comes with leaving home, leaving the familiar, and stepping toward a war they have imagined but never seen. A cold wind slips across the water. You feel it touch your face, a whisper of something coming, something larger than the campfires and drills of Louisiana, something heavier than discrimination, something that will test not just skills, but the very shape of a man's endurance. The soldiers board in silence, not because they have nothing to say, but because this moment feels too big for casual words. Bootsteps clack on the metal gangway. Helmets shift. Canvas bags brush against jackets. A low murmur drifts across the line, but nothing rises above the sound of the ocean pressing softly against the pier. As you walk with them into the dim belly of the ship, the air grows thick with engine heat and the oily scent of diesel. The hold is crowded, tanks chained in place, boxes of ammunition strapped tight, the walls sweating with condensation. This ship will be their world for weeks, a place suspended between two lands, between expectation and reality, between the prejudice they know and the uncertainty that waits. You stand near a support beam as the ramp closes. Darkness settles. Metal locks echo like slow, deliberate heartbeats. And then the ship sighs, a long, deep exhale, and begins to move. Life in the grey belly of the ship. Days at sea blend into each other, each one shaped by the same elements. The constant hum of turbines, the thrum of waves against the hull, the feeling of being carried toward something huge and invisible. You walk through narrow corridors lit by flickering bulbs. The air is always warm, always crowded, always restless. The men of the 761st sleep in tight rows, hammocks slung so close their elbows nearly touch. Their breathing rises and falls in a soft collective rhythm, like a giant, exhausted choir. Personal space disappears here. Privacy dissolves. You lean against the wall and listen as someone plays cards on a crate. The shuffling of paper. The soft laughter that hides homesickness. The quiet muttering of someone remembering a prayer whispered by a grandmother before he left. In the hold, the tanks rest under dim lamps. Their surfaces glisten with moisture, as if sweating through the journey. Mechanics check them daily, wiping condensation, tightening straps, oiling joints. One man kneels beside a track and presses his palm to it, feeling the cold steel as if sensing its pulse. They talk to their tanks sometimes, not loudly, not in a way that invites attention, but with the reverence of someone speaking to a companion. A turret becomes a friend. A gear lever becomes a lifeline. A tank becomes a promise they intend to keep. Every evening, you gather with them on the upper deck where the wind is sharp and the ocean stretches endlessly in all directions. The sky is huge, unbearably huge, a vault of shifting clouds and occasional stars. Some men stand alone, looking toward the horizon. Others cluster together, leaning on the rail, hands cold from the wind. Every now and then, a shout echoes from another part of the ship, someone spotting dolphins or a distant vessel, but mostly the deck is filled with a steady rhythm of boots and soft murmurs. The war feels far away here, and yet closer than ever. The weight of what they carry. At night, storms roll in. Rain lashes the deck. The ship tilts hard to port, then swings back. Metal moans. Water crashes against the bow in bursts like muffled explosions. Inside the lower compartments, the shaking turns sleep into a temporary death. Deep, heavy, desperate. You close your eyes and feel the sway move through your bones. In those dark hours, the men think of home. Think of promises whispered into the ears of wives or sweethearts. Think of children who won't understand why their fathers are gone. Think of parents who have already seen too much loss. But there's something else they think about too, a burden that is not spoken aloud. They know they are crossing the ocean not only to fight Germans, but to fight the expectations of their own country. Every drill they endured, every insult they ignored, every test they aced while others doubted them, all of it comes with them, packed tighter than any duffel bag. You sense a collective truth moving through the ship like a tide. If they fail, people will say the army was right to question them. If they succeed, some will call it luck. But if they excel, if they become undeniable, then history will have to change its shape. You stand among them as the ship creaks again, as the lights flicker, as a few men steady themselves with wide stances. And you realize they are not afraid of the ocean, not afraid of the war. They are afraid of being unseen. The briefing that changes everything. A week into the voyage, the battalion gathers in the mess hall, a cramped space smelling of coffee, steel, and damp fabric. The walls vibrate with the engine's pulse. Steam fogs the air. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates stands near the front, his hands clasped behind him. He waits for the murmurs to settle. The men fall silent, their faces lit by the dim yellow bulbs overhead. Bates speaks quietly, each word deliberate. They will be landing in Europe soon. They will face a harsh winter. They will be attached to units that do not know them and may not welcome them, and they will be expected to perform at a level that leaves no room for error. You listen as his voice carries through the room. He does not sugarcoat anything. He does not speak like someone trying to inspire. He speaks like someone who trusts his men more than anyone else does. Then he reads a short line from higher command, a line sent by General George S. Patton, who had once expressed doubts about using a black armored unit. "I have nothing but the best for my army, and I will use them." A ripple moves through the room. Patton is known for his ferocity, his bluntness, his refusal to accept mediocrity. To be chosen by him, even reluctantly, carries weight like armor. You feel the men absorb this silently, not boastfully, not triumphantly, just with a quiet recognition that the world has shifted by a fraction, a step forward, small but real. The long night before landfall. As the transport nears the coast, tension builds in the air. Not fear, something deeper, something like the moment before a musician touches the first key. Expectation wrapped in stillness. The water grows colder, the wind sharper, the sky more muted, a thin grey blanket stretched over endless waves. You stand on deck with the men during the final night at sea. The lights of Europe glow faintly on the horizon, flickering like distant embers. Some men lean against the rail with their eyes closed, breathing in the cold air. Others check and recheck their gear, tightening straps, adjusting collars, running fingers along the seams of their jackets. A few whisper quietly, "Almost time. Gonna do it right. We know what we are." The tanks, down in the hold, seem to vibrate with the pulse of the waves. Chains rattle softly. Metal shifts. You place your hand on the railing and feel the ocean's slow heartbeat. The world is holding its breath. Europe takes shape in the mist. Dawn rises pale and thin. Fog clings to the coastline, softening everything into shades of grey and silver. Buildings appear first as silhouettes, church spires, sloped rooftops, chimneys leaning against the cold. The ship slows. Engines rumble. Orders crackle over the intercom. The men gather on deck, helmets in hand, rifles slung over their shoulders. Their breath clouds the air, rising in small white threads that vanish quickly in the wind. A few white soldiers from another unit stand nearby, eyeing the 761st with a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and something else, something like envy, though they won't say it. Because these black tankers have made it here, to the place where war is no longer a rumor, where skill matters more than any opinion written on a piece of paper. You listen as the first anchor drops with a deep metallic roar. Seagulls swirl overhead, crying into the wind. The water churns as landing craft approach. The battalion prepares to disembark. This is the moment everything has been pointing toward. The breaking of one world and the beginning of another. You feel the ship shift as the ramp lowers. Cold air rushes in, smelling of salt, smoke, and the distant memory of battles fought before their arrival. The men take their first step onto foreign soil. Boots striking cobblestone. Heads bowed slightly against the cold. Eyes fixed forward. There is no applause. No ceremony. No welcoming committee. Just Europe, wounded, waiting, watching. And the quiet truth settles around them. They are here, and nothing will ever be the same. Chapter 3: The Baptism of Fire. Frenzied Forest, Frozen Roads. The forest that swallows sound. You feel it long before you see it. A silence deeper than the sea, denser than fog, older than any road carved through these woods. Europe's winter hangs suspended in the branches of the Ardennes, the air cold enough to hold sound hostage. Even the distant guns you've heard on the horizon since arrival seem muffled now, like thunder trapped behind mountains. Snow clings to the pines in thick white armor. The forest smells of ice, sap, and old smoke. Light struggles to break through the canopy. You stand beside the men of the 761st as their tanks move cautiously onto a narrow road. Tracks bite into frozen mud. Engines rumble low, restrained, the sound of an animal bracing for its first strike. The crews peer into the woods with slow, deliberate movements, scanning shadows, scanning branches, scanning everything. No one knows what waits deeper inside. But the veterans who lead them, guides from other units with weary eyes and scarves wrapped tight against the cold, say only one thing: stay sharp. They're out there. And when you look at the men, you can see it too. Not fear, not uncertainty, but a stillness shaped by long training and quiet determination. This is no Louisiana heat. This is no camp exercise. This forest has swallowed armies before. Now, it watches them. The road to Morvilliers. The orders come at dawn. The battalion is to move toward a small crossroads town, an unassuming cluster of stone houses and old barns called Morvilliers, a place no tourist would notice, no map would praise. But in war, crossroads are everything. You stand near the lead tanks as Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates meets briefly with the company commanders. His breath fogs the air. His gloves are stiff from cold. His eyes remain fixed on the horizon, as if reading something invisible in the morning light. The men gather behind their tanks, adjusting straps, tightening buckles, stomping their feet against the frost. No one speaks loudly. The cold steals volume from the voice, but the moment steals it more. The crews mount up. Inside the tanks, condensation beads on the steel walls. The interior smells of oil, canvas, and nervous sweat. Hands wrap around grips and levers polished smooth by months of drills. You can almost feel the closeness of the space, the heat of bodies in thick jackets, the low hum of the engine underfoot, the echo of each breath trapped in metal. Outside, infantry fan out along the roadside, forming a spear tip of movement. The trees loom like ancient pillars. The snow muffles everything. You hear the tank commander of one of the lead vehicles speak quietly through the intercom. Easy ahead. Eyes open. Let's move. And they move. Tracks crunch softly over snow and frozen leaves. The forest seems to narrow around them, pressing close, listening. The men's breaths fog up the periscope glass. Every branch looks like a rifle. Every shadow looks like a soldier. The cold becomes something alive. A watcher, a warning. And you sense, as they do, that the forest is not empty. First contact. It happens fast. War rarely announces itself. It erupts. The lead tank rounds a bend, a tight turn where the road hugs a small ridge, and the world cracks open. A German anti-tank gun fires from deep inside the trees, the muzzle flash hidden behind a camouflaged screen of branches. The sound hits like a lightning strike. White smoke bursts from the barrel. The shell screams across the narrow road. It slams into the lead tank's front plate, sparks exploding in a violent spray. Inside, the crew is thrown hard against the steel walls. Headsets rattle. A man curses under his breath. The armor holds, barely, but the message is clear. The Black Panthers are no longer on the edge of war. They are inside it. Infantry dive for the ditch. Another shot cracks the air. Branches fall. Snow erupts upward in a white cloud. You feel the adrenaline ripple through the column, not in shouts or panic, but in a tightening of shoulders, a sharpening of breath, a collective readiness that training has carved into bone. The second tank swivels its turret. The gunner adjusts elevation with practiced calm. The loader slams a shell into place. The commander leans into the periscope. And then, a deep, resonant boom as the cannon fires. The recoil shudders through the road. The shell whistles through the trees and detonates in a plume of flame where the hidden gun once sat. Snow rains down. Smoke curls upward. Branches fall in slow, heavy arcs. Silence follows, but a different silence than before. A charged silence. A silence shaped by the knowledge that this fight has only begun. The frenzied forest. The woods erupt. Machine gun fire slices through the air. Short bursts, precise, cold. Bullets ping off tank armor like hail against metal roofs. Men shout orders over the roar of engines. Inside the second tank, a gunner steadies himself, breath slow and controlled as he scans for movement. The commander taps the side of the turret twice, a signal barely audible over the chaos. And still, the men are calm. This calm is their weapon. Not bravado, not noise, not fury, but focus. Lieutenant Colonel Bates moves along the line on foot, shouting directions, pointing to gaps in the trees, coordinating infantry and armor. His voice is steady, even as the air warms with muzzle flashes and acrid smoke. You watch him lift a pair of binoculars, snow collecting in the folds of his coat. He sees something you cannot, a cluster of German positions dug into a shallow ravine ahead, firing upward onto the road. He signals for 2 tanks and a half-track to flank. The order ripples down the line. Engines roar. Tracks bite into frozen earth. The tanks turn and disappear into the trees, metal scraping against bark. Inside one of those vehicles is Sergeant Ruben Rivers, though his name drifts through this chapter like a quiet shadow, like a presence you sense more than hear. He moves with confidence, turret swiveling smoothly, scanning for flashes of movement between trees. He's not reckless, just precise. The tanks charge through a thicket. Branches claw at the armor. Snow explodes around them as they fire. The German positions collapse under the pressure, men scrambling, helmets glinting, weapons falling silent as the tanks push hard, relentless, carving a wedge through the defense line. You watch the infantry surge behind them, moving quickly through the gaps, their boots sliding on wet snow, their breaths breaking in small clouds. The forest trembles. The air fills with the metallic scent of gunfire. Somewhere, a tree cracks and falls, splintering into the snow. And through it all, the 761st moves as if they were born for this. Not because war is natural, but because endurance is. Their training, their discipline, their resilience, everything they had to fight through in Louisiana, flows into every decision, every maneuver, every heartbeat. The road takes its toll. By late morning, the battalion secures the bend in the road. Smoke drifts upward through the pines, slow and grey. Snow melts where flames touched the earth. The forest is quiet again, but the kind of quiet that trembles beneath the surface. Mechanics arrive quickly, crawling over tanks in the open cold, checking armor plates, tightening bolts with numb fingers. Infantry gather in small groups, sharing canteens, adjusting scarves, rubbing warmth back into their hands. You stand beside a tank as the crew opens the hatch. Heat escapes in a rush. Their faces glisten with sweat despite the frigid air. Their eyes are sharp but tired, the tension of survival still fading from their limbs. One of them steps out and looks toward the trees, breathing deeply. Not fear, not relief, something more like acceptance. Because this, the chaos, the snow, the hidden enemy, is only the beginning. Lieutenant Colonel Bates walks the line, checking each crew, listening to quiet reports. He nods, speaks softly, places a gloved hand on a shoulder now and then. He knows the truth. They fought well, exceptionally well, better than any doubter would have believed. But the war does not pause for praise. The order comes down from division headquarters. Continue advancing. Enemy resistance expected to increase. Of course it will. The 761st adjusts straps, checks weapons, wipes frost from periscopes. You watch them re-enter the tanks, one by one, disappearing back into the metal shells that carry both danger and safety. The engines start again. The forest shivers, and the column rolls forward. A winter that tests the soul. Snow begins to fall. Soft flakes drift through the trees, landing on helmets, settling on tank turrets, dissolving on warm exhaust pipes. It should be beautiful. It almost is. But beauty in war is a fragile thing. Visibility drops. The world turns pale, blurred, unfamiliar. You listen to the radio chatter in one of the tanks. Road narrowing. Watch the left ridge. Possible movement ahead. Stay tight. The snowfall thickens. Wind sweeps through the branches, shaking loose more powdery white. Inside the tank, the air grows warm and close, condensation gathering on steel walls, dripping onto boots and gloves. The loader wipes frost from a shell's casing before sliding it into the rack. The driver adjusts his goggles, his breath fogging the glass. They push forward slowly, deliberately, like men walking on ice. And then the trees part, just enough to reveal a small plateau blanketed in white, a place where the wind howls louder, where the snow drifts deeper, where the horizon hides behind a grey curtain. This is the edge of the forest. Beyond it lie towns scarred by fire, roads mined with retreat, and ridges where Germans watch from hidden nests. You feel the weight of history pressing in. The 761st has passed its first test. The next ones will demand even more. The first day ends. By the time darkness begins to creep through the branches, the battalion has secured a long stretch of the wooded road. Their tanks are coated in soot and snow, their uniforms stiff with cold, their bodies weary but unbroken. A temporary camp forms near a clearing. Stoves hiss. Cooks distribute hot broth and bread. Men huddle in groups, their voices low, their movements slow. You stand near the tanks as they cool, their metal ticking softly, the sound of effort settling into rest. No one boasts. No one celebrates. They are too tired for that, and too aware of what waits tomorrow. But beneath the fatigue, beneath the cold, beneath the memory of danger still tingling in their limbs, a truth settles quietly. They did what few expected. They held. They fought. They proved themselves. Snow continues to fall around them. Slow, gentle, almost tender. And the forest, stripped of its violence for now, stands watch over the Black Panthers as night claims the road they earned through fire. Chapter 4. holding the line at Morvilliers. The town that waits in silence. You reach Morvilliers before dawn, a small French village pressed into the earth like a faded memory. Stone houses tilt gently against each other. Wooden shutters hang open in the cold. Smoke curls from chimneys where families huddle in rooms darkened by months of fear. The air smells of frozen soil, damp wood, and ashes raked from last night's hearths. You stand at the edge of the village as the first light drifts over the roofs. Everything here feels bruised. Walls chipped, roads scarred, the church steeple missing its bell. War has passed through, but not yet finished. The 761st rumbles into the square, their tanks trailing columns of breath-like exhaust. Children peek from doorways. Old men clutch coats tighter around their thin frames. Women watch from behind curtains, faces lined with worry and something like curiosity. They've seen many soldiers, but never an armored unit like this one. Some hesitate, unsure. You can feel their uncertainty, etched into the air, held delicately between breath and history. Then one woman steps forward, scarf wrapped tight, eyes soft. She nods, a small, tired nod, and the village begins to breathe again. The approach of danger. The orders are clear. Hold Morvilliers. Hold the crossroads. Hold until reinforcements arrive. But reinforcements are delayed. Snow slows everything. Supplies crawl. Communication lines freeze as easily as rivers. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates stands beside a map table set up in an old cafe, the smell of stale wine mixing with engine fumes leaking in from the street. His gloves lie beside him, fingers stiff with cold. Company commanders gather around. The intelligence report is thin. German forces retreating from the forest may attempt to retake the village. Armor spotted 3 miles east. Infantry likely hidden in the ravines nearby. The crossroads make Morvilliers valuable. Too valuable to lose. Bates doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't dramatize. He speaks with the same quiet steadiness he brought from Louisiana's dust to Europe's snow. We hold the line, he says. Simple. Absolute. Outside, you hear the tanks adjusting position, their engines coughing into the morning. Crewmen stamp their boots. Infantry spread out through alleys. Snow begins to fall again, soft, fine, persistent. And somewhere beyond the ridge, you can sense movement, not seen, not heard, but present, the way a storm announces itself, before the wind rises. The first test of the day. The attack comes with the sun, a pale, reluctant sunrise smothered by clouds. A German artillery shell lands on the outskirts of the village, carving a chunk out of a stone wall. The sound ripples across Morvilliers like a crack in the sky. Infantry dive behind carts and stacks of firewood. Civilians scatter into basements. A stray dog runs down the street, tail tucked, paws slipping on ice. The Black Panthers climb into their tanks. Hatches slam shut. Engines roar awake. Inside the armor, the world narrows. To metal, to breath, to the hum of the intercom. The first German infantry appear between the trees. Dark shapes moving fast, rifles raised, boots cutting trails in the snow. The Panthers fire warning bursts. Controlled, precise. Puffs of smoke blooming from the 30 caliber guns like brief grey flowers. The infantry scatter. Some dive behind rocks. Others drop to their bellies. And then the heavier sound arrives. A tank engine. Deep. Metallic. Confident. The enemy armor appears between two naked oaks. A Panzer IV, snow clinging to its turret, exhaust smoke billowing in black streams. You feel the tension shift. A tank duel is different. Heavier. More intimate. A conversation between steel shells and the physics of survival. The Panther crew reacts instantly. Inside the turret. The loader slams a shell into place, gloved hands steady. The gunner adjusts elevation, jaw tight. The commander leans into his periscope, breath fogging the glass. Target acquired, he murmurs. The cannon fires. The recoil shudders the entire street. Stone rattles. Snow leaps from rooftops. The shell strikes the Panzer's front plate. A burst of flame. A shower of sparks. It doesn't penetrate. You hear the German tank respond with its own cannon, the shock wave rolling through the village like a physical force. Glass shatters. Doors slam open. The round whizzes past the American tank, missing by inches. A second Panther tank flanks left, treads grinding over frozen mud. Its turret swivels. Smooth. Disciplined. Another blast. Another hit. This time, the Panzer shudders, smoke pouring from its vents, crew scrambling out into the snow. The village exhales. The first wave is broken. But the day has only begun. The long, slow grind. Hours pass in fragments. Short bursts of fighting. Long stretches of tense quiet. Snow falling without pause. Morvilliers becomes a maze of cold and caution. Tank engines idle in alleyways. Gunners watch from narrow angles, scanning rooftops. Infantry move between doorways in swift shadows. You walk through the square where a market once stood. The wooden stalls now empty. The cobblestones slick with melted frost. A group of French villagers gathers near the church, handing out warm bread to soldiers. An old man lights a cigarette with trembling hands, offering it to a crewman whose breath comes out in shaky bursts. Despite the fear, a fragile human warmth flickers here. The Panthers take turns rotating crews so that men can warm their hands over stoves inside houses abandoned earlier in the war. Steam rises from tin cups. Gloves dry beside fireplaces. But even in rest, their ears remain tuned to the landscape. Every creak of timber, every distant echo, every gust of wind. War teaches the difference between natural and unnatural sounds. A natural sound passes. An unnatural sound lingers. Midday arrives, but the sky remains grey. Snow piles on tank hulls, softening their sharp edges. Smoke from cooking fires mingles with exhaust. Then, a distant rumble. Not thunder, not wind. Engines. Several of them. The men stand. Cups drop into the snow. Gloves are pulled on. Helmets adjusted. The respite ends. The push against the crossroads. The crossroads lies east of the village, a bare stretch of land flanked by a low ridge on one side and a ditch on the other. The 761st positions 3 tanks along the left side, using the ridge as cover. Infantry take the ditch. A machine gun team sets up behind an overturned cart. You feel the cold bite deeper. Breath freezes faster. Snowflakes turn sharper. The enemy appears as grey silhouettes in the whiteness. First infantry, then armoured half-tracks, then 2 more Panzer IVs. Black crosses faint beneath frost. They move with caution, spread out, trained. No underestimation here. No hesitation. This is no probing force. This is a deliberate attempt to take Morvilliers back. The Black Panthers fire first. A coordinated volley. 3 tanks roaring at once. Noise rolling across the ridge like controlled thunder. The Germans scatter. Machine gun fire rattles from behind a stone wall. The ditch fills with smoke and snow. Half-tracks disgorge troops, boots crunching hard in synchronized lines. Inside one Panther tank, the commander's voice is firm. Hold your fire. Wait, wait, now. The gunner squeezes the trigger. The shell races forward, a streak of heat against frozen wind, and strikes the lead half-track. Flame bursts skyward. Snow melts in a violent hiss. Shrapnel sprays into the ridge. But the Germans keep moving. They press toward the crossroads, firing from prone positions, using pockets of terrain like seasoned veterans. This is the kind of enemy the 761st trained for. This is the kind of moment their entire journey has built toward. And they face it with the same quiet resolve. They carried through segregation, through dust, through doubt, through the ocean. The line does not break. The firefight intensifies. One enemy tank pushes aggressively toward the right flank, firing as it advances. Its shells slam into the ground near the ditch, spraying soldiers with frozen dirt. A Panther gunner adjusts his scope. Breath held. Shoulders steady. 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 The shot lands true. The enemy tank jerks. Smoke billowing from its turret joint. Tracks skidding as it grinds to a halt. Infantry cheer. Not loudly, but with a low, relieved exhale. Still, more Germans appear from the treeline. The assault is relentless. The Panthers pivot, reposition, fire again. Inside the tanks, the temperature climbs. Sweat freezing at the edges of collars. Hands red and raw. Eyes burning from smoke and strain. Outside, the wind grows harsher. Snow blows sideways. Visibility shrinks. The crossroads becomes a blur of movement and sound. Shouts. Engine growls. Weapon bursts. The metallic scream of ricochets. But the line holds. Every time the enemy pushes, they meet steel, discipline, and a quiet refusal to yield. The 761st does not break. Not today. Not here. Dusk descends on the defended road. By late afternoon, the attack dwindles. Not because the Germans lack courage, but because they lack space and time. Bodies lie in the snow. Vehicles burn in slow, smoky flames. The surviving enemy troops retreat into the woods, their forms dissolving into the grey dusk. The wind softens. The snowfall lightens. An eerie calm returns to Morvilliers. You stand at the crossroads with the Panthers as they inspect damage. The tanks are pitted with dents. Some treads are chipped. A few periscopes cracked from close-range hits. But they are whole. And so are their crews. One crewman lifts his helmet and wipes his brow, steam rising in the cold. Another sits on the tank's hull, breathing deeply, fingers trembling slightly from adrenaline leaking out of his blood. Infantry share water and rations in the ditch. Someone produces a small harmonica and plays 2 soft notes before exhaustion cuts the melody short. The day ends the way battles often do. Not with triumph, not with ceremony, but with a slow settling of truth. They held. They protected the village. They proved themselves again. The villagers emerge from hiding. A little girl offers a soldier a piece of bread. An old woman touches the side of a tank gently, as if thanking it. Night slides over the rooftops. Windows glow faint amber. A church bell, repaired with a makeshift rope, sounds once lonely and hollow, and the Black Panthers stand guard in the snow, silent watchers on the edge of a wounded world. They have earned this ground, and tomorrow they will move again. Chapter 5: The Road of Fire, Pushing Through the Siegfried Line. The Threshold of Steel. You hear it before you see it, a low, grinding hum that seems to rise from the earth itself, a kind of subterranean groan, as if the land is remembering every battle it has suffered. The Siegfried Line, a barrier of bunkers, dragon's teeth, minefields, trenches, and reinforced emplacements, a scar carved across western Germany, designed to stop armies far larger than the 761st. The morning air is grey, the sky stretched thin like old cloth. Cold presses against your skin. Every breath feels heavier than the last. The Black Panthers stand at the edge of a small valley that leads toward the first row of concrete fortifications. Their tanks idle in a slow, uneasy rhythm. Guns point forward. Exhaust spills in slow, trembling clouds. You watch them prepare. Hands adjusting gloves. Jackets pulled tighter. Eyes narrowed at the distant shapes half buried in snow. The Siegfried Line doesn't look alive. But it is. Somewhere in those bunkers, German soldiers wait. Silent, disciplined, ready to defend the last threshold before their homeland. The radio crackles low. Commands filter through static. Snow begins to fall again. Thin flakes drifting, touching steel and melting instantly. You step closer, hearing the weight in the men's breathing. Not fear, not dread, just the knowledge that this place will require everything of them. More than skill, more than endurance, more than bravery. It will require a quiet kind of relentlessness, a refusal to stop, even when the road itself tries to break them. Crossing the dead zone. The order comes shortly after dawn. Engines roar to life. Tracks churn the snow. The column advances slowly. Tanks forming a staggered line behind the lead vehicles. The valley floor is open, exposed. No trees for cover. No buildings. Only winter grass bowing under the weight of frost. Halfway across, the first machine gun bursts erupt from the bunkers. Sharp, rhythmic, cutting through the cold with terrifying precision. Bullets strike tank armor with metallic shrieks. Infantry dive into depressions in the earth. Snow leaps into the air with each hit. Inside the lead tank, the crew stays calm. Just 2 degrees left. Gunner ready. Fire! The cannon recoils with a violent jolt. A smoking trail cuts through the valley and slams into the first bunker. A plume of dust and shattered concrete rises. But the line responds. More guns. More flashes. More fire. The valley becomes a corridor of sound, echoing, rolling, multiplying between hills and fortifications. The Panthers move forward anyway. Not fast. Not reckless. Just steady. The kind of steady that can move mountains. You feel the vibration in your ribs. The ground trembles with each blast. The air smells of burning metal and cold stone. The Siegfried Line is awake now. fully. Dragon's teeth. As the tanks approach the first defensive layer, the landscape changes. Concrete pyramids, dragon's teeth, jut from the ground in rows like the spine of some enormous buried creature. Snow rests on them in perfect white triangles. Between them, mines lie hidden, carefully arranged in patterns only the enemy fully understands. The Panthers stop short. Engine rumble dims. Wind whistles between the strange concrete forest. Engineers rush forward, small figures moving carefully through the teeth, probing the snow with long metal rods, marking safe paths with thin flags. You watch them work, gloved fingers trembling from cold and fear, every step measured, every breath deliberate. The tanks wait, their engines idle like beasts held on reins, and the bunkers fire again, machine guns hissing from slits barely visible in the concrete walls. Engineers press themselves into the snow. Some don't move. Infantry lay covering fire, bullets sparking off the teeth, ricochets whining through the grey air. You can feel the tension stretching, the whole world narrowing into a single equation. Clear the mines, or stay trapped forever at the threshold. Minutes pass like hours. The cold grows sharper. The wind cuts harder. Then, a signal. A path is open. Not safe. Just safer than the rest. The Panthers roll forward, tracks weaving between the concrete spikes. Metal grinds on ice. Treads clatter over hidden stones. Engines roar in short, defiant bursts. One slip would mean destruction, but they move with discipline, with patience, with a kind of silent prayer built from months of impossible expectations. And when they finally break through the dragon's teeth, the whole battlefield seems to shift. There is no applause, no cry of triumph, just the knowledge that they have come farther than many believed possible. Fire in the bunkers. Beyond the dragon's teeth lie the heart of the defences. Interlocking bunkers built into the hills like concrete veins. Their walls are thick, their angles precise, their machine gun nests perfectly placed to funnel death into every approach. Snow falls harder now. Wind picks up. Visibility shrinks. But the 761st pushes forward. Tank shells blow apart bunker corners. Huge chunks falling like broken teeth. Infantry lob grenades into narrow embrasures. Smoke spills across the hillside. You stand behind one Panther tank as its turret fires again and again, each blast sending shudders through your chest, each recoil shaking snow from the turret roof in drifts. Inside the tank, the gunner wipes sweat from his brow. Despite the cold, the loader's hands move with mechanical confidence. The commander watches through the periscope, face taut with focus. The world outside becomes fragments, shadows running between trenches, tracer bullets slicing the air, smoke drifting like torn cloth. Then, the bunker to the right erupts from within. A plume of flame bursts upward. German soldiers spill out, arms raised, faces pale under soot. The Panthers do not fire. They hold, and the silence that follows is heavy, trembling, alive with relief. But the fight is not over. The counterattack. In mid-afternoon, when the snow thickens into sheets of white, and clouds sag low over the hills, The German counterattack begins. It comes from the east, from a shallow valley hidden behind a ridge. You feel it before you see it. The shift in the air, the sudden hush among birds, the tremble in distant ground. Then, a roar. Engines. Several German armored vehicles crest the ridge, their silhouettes dark against the white sky. Infantry run beside them, rifles slung, helmets dusted with frost. The Panthers swivel turrets. Infantry take positions. Orders crackle through radios with urgency, but no panic. This is the moment the Siegfried Line was built for. This is the moment the 761st trained for. The two forces meet in a storm of sound. Shells arc through the snowy air, detonating with muffled thuds. Machine guns stitch the ground in long, angry lines. Smoke rolls across the valley floor. One panther takes a hit to its side. Sparks erupt. The tank lurches, snow spraying in a wide arc. But the armor holds. It holds. Inside the tank, the crew breathes hard, steadying themselves. The gunner returns fire. Another burst of flame. Another roar. Another enemy vehicle disabled. The battlefield becomes a blur. German infantry diving for cover. Snow exploding in white plumes. Panther tanks advancing inch by inch. Through the storm of bullets. One tank pushes forward faster than the rest, commanded by a soft-spoken, relentless man, Sergeant Ruben Rivers. He sees an opening, a gap between two enemy vehicles, and takes it, turret swinging with deadly precision. The shot lands. A German tank erupts in black fire, but Rivers doesn't stop. He never does. And the gap he creates allows the Panthers to flank the enemy force. The counterattack shatters, not quickly, not easily, but completely, and when the smoke settles, the snow drifts silently over metal wreckage, as if trying to bury the memory of what happened. The line breaks. Near dusk, the last resistance collapses. A final bunker surrenders. A trench network falls silent. The valley grows still. The Siegfried Line, this section of it, has been breached, not by luck, not by overwhelming numbers, but by persistence, by discipline, by grit, by the quiet, relentless determination of men who were never meant to be here in the first place, according to the world that raised them. You watch the Panthers roll forward, their tanks coated in soot and frost, their crewmen shivering in the sudden quiet. There is no celebration, no victory cry, just a slow, deep exhale, the kind that happens when impossible things become real. The men dismount, stretching stiff limbs, sharing water, checking each other's hands for frostbite. Some sit on the tank's hull, letting the engine warmth seep through their uniforms. Others kneel in the snow, heads bowed, not in prayer, but in exhaustion. Snow continues to fall, soft and relentless, and the Siegfried Line, that monstrous fortress of concrete and fear, lies behind them now, broken, quiet, breached by men who were not expected to make it this far, but they did, and tomorrow they will go farther still. Chapter 6. The Frozen March, Towns of Smoke and Endless Roads. The road that never ends. You feel it first through the soles of your boots. A subtle vibration running through the frozen ground. A steady pulse like the heartbeat of a giant buried beneath the snow. The panthers are moving again. Morning barely touches the sky. Just a faint smear of pale light behind thick winter clouds. The world looks washed out, as if color itself has resigned from the season. Tanks crawl forward in a long file, tracks grinding over ice, exhaust drifting in slow, ghostly ribbons. The road stretches ahead, winding, narrow, unforgiving. It passes through forests stripped bare by winter, fields pocked by craters, villages reduced to outlines of chimneys and broken beams. You walk beside them for a few moments, feeling the cold seep into your bones. It is not a sharp cold, not the kind that surprises. It is the deep, quiet cold of a landscape resigned to suffering. The men inside the tanks feel it too. Even with engines warming the metal walls, their fingers ache. Their breath condenses in small clouds. Their eyes sting from the dry, frigid air. But they keep moving, because the front demands it, because time is fragile, because every mile gained takes pressure off units fighting nearby, and because stopping means letting the cold become the enemy. Towns of smoke. By mid-morning, they reach the first village of the day. It has no name anymore. The signpost was blown apart weeks ago. Houses stand roofless, walls half collapsed, as if yawning in exhaustion. A church steeple leans at an impossible angle. Bits of stained glass glitter faintly in the snow like fallen stars. Smoke rises from several buildings, thin, trembling plumes that curl into the grey sky. You step closer and smell it. Wet wood, old ash, something metallic beneath. The villagers, those who remain, emerge slowly, timidly, hands raised slightly, faces pale with suspicion and hope tangled together. Children cling to their mothers' coats. A young man pushes an elderly woman in a wheelbarrow, the wheel squeaking rhythmically. The Panthers park their tanks along the main road. Engines rumble low, a sound that vibrates through shattered windows. Crewmen dismount, not with swagger, not with spectacle, just with tired purpose, stretching legs, shaking stiffness from arms, pulling scarves tighter. Infantry spread out, checking alleys and barns. The air feels brittle with tension. One wrong move and the silence could erupt. But there is no enemy here, only survivors. A French woman approaches a tank crew with a wooden ladle and a pot of watery broth. Steam rises into the cold. She serves quietly. They thank her quietly. And for a moment, a fleeting, fragile moment, the war loosens its grip. Even the sky seems to soften. The unexpected contact. The battalion doesn't stay long. They can't. Supplies are thin. Fuel thinner. Time is the thinnest of all. Before they leave the village, a runner arrives. A young infantryman, cheeks red from cold, breath coming fast. He hands Bates a crumpled note. Enemy armor sighted ahead. Moving fast. Likely heading for a road junction 2 miles east. Bates reads it once, folds it carefully, and speaks with that quiet, steady tone that has followed the Panthers since Louisiana. We move now. Tanks roar back to life. Villagers step aside. Some wave. Some simply watch. Some cross themselves. The road east cuts through a shallow valley. Snow gathers in pockets. Wind scraping across the open ground. You can feel the tension rising. Not sharp, not sudden. Slow, inevitable, like a tide. The Panthers advance, keeping distance between vehicles, turrets swiveling in slow arcs. Then, a flash of movement on the horizon. Not a trick of the light. Not wind. Engine smoke. Dark shapes. Enemy armor. The crews tighten their grips. Breath grows shallow inside the turrets. The air vibrates with anticipation. The frozen march is over. The battle begins. Clash at the junction. The junction appears suddenly, a simple crossing of two narrow roads, marked by a battered signpost, leaning like an old soldier too tired to stand straight. The Germans arrive at the same moment. You see their vehicles crest a small ridge. 3 armored cars, 2 half-tracks, a single tank moving cautiously in the center. The Panthers halt. Briefly, 1 heartbeat. Then they open fire. The sound rolls across the valley, like thunder breaking under ice. The first American shell hits the lead armored car. It flips on its side, metal groaning, flames licking outward. The Germans respond instantly. Machine guns rattling, infantry pouring out of half-tracks, spreading wide. Inside a Panther tank. The gunner inhales once, exhales slowly, adjusts his aim. The loader pushes shells into the breech with steady hands. The commander murmurs coordinates. You feel the tank vibrate as it fires again. Another hit. Another plume of fire. But the enemy tank, a Panzer IV, dark and angular, holds its ground. It fires. The shell slams into a Panther's glacis plate, sparks bursting across the snow. The armor holds. But the message is clear. This enemy is skilled. The Panthers reposition. 1 veering left. 2 holding center. Another moving into a flanking approach. The junction becomes a maelstrom of smoke and snow. Shouts. Shell impacts. Bullets stitching the frozen ground. Then, another figure emerges in the chaos. Sergeant Ruben Rivers. His tank maneuvers boldly, exposing itself just enough to bait the enemy, drawing the Panzer's aim. It works. The German tank fires at him. A direct hit on the forward track. Snow and steel explode in a blinding spray. Rivers' tank jerks, skids, stops. Smoke curls from the damaged track. But the turret still turns. Inside, the crew steadies themselves. The commander calls for fire. The gunner takes aim. 1 shot. Straight. Clean. Devastating. The Panzer shudders. Stops. Smoke billowing from its vents. It is over. The crossroads remains in Panther hands. The cost of endurance. When the smoke settles, the frozen valley grows quiet again. Snowflakes drift down, softening the sharp edges of wreckage. But the victory is not without cost. Rivers' tank is crippled. Others show track damage, cracked periscopes, dented plates from close-range fire. Medics rush to both sides of the road, tending to infantry who slipped on ice under heavy fire, or were struck by shrapnel ricocheting off frozen earth. The men speak little. Fatigue hangs on them like another layer of frost. They have been moving for days. with little sleep, little hot food, little warmth. Their uniforms are stiff, their boots soaked, their faces raw from wind, but they remain upright, still, present. A quiet strength radiates from them, not shouted, not worn as pride, just carried like breath. Bates walks the line, checking tank damage, touching shoulders, listening to short reports. He pauses beside Rivers' immobilized tank. Their eyes meet, a brief exchange, unspoken but heavy with respect. Rivers refuses evacuation. Not yet. Not while his tank can still fire. Not while the line needs him. Bates knows better than to argue. He simply nods. The frozen march continues. Through villages half alive. As afternoon dips toward evening, the battalion pushes onward, moving through more villages, some burnt to foundations, others broken but inhabited. In one town, a butcher shop stands half collapsed, meat hooks swaying gently in the cold wind. In another, a school sits roofless, chalkboard covered in drifted snow, lessons frozen mid-sentence. The Panthers pass through like shadows, not lingering, not disturbing, simply existing between suffering and hope. In one village, a boy of maybe 12 waves a French flag from a window, his face smudged with soot. A Panther crewman tosses him a chocolate bar. The boy's eyes widen, a small spark in an otherwise grey world. But such moments are rare. Mostly, the people watch in silence, eyes hollow, movements slow, lives suspended. You feel a weight settle in the chest, a sense that liberation is not a single moment, but a long, aching process. And the Panthers are part of that process, invisible threads of endurance, holding the front together. Night on the endless road. Darkness gathers early in winter. The world turns bluish-grey, shadows stretching long across the snow. The tanks pull into a small clearing beside a stand of bare trees. Engines wind down. Silence settles. Men climb out, breath thick in the cold, limbs stiff, faces hollow with fatigue. A small fire crackles, barely enough to warm hands, but enough to remind them of home. They sit in a circle, quiet, shoulders huddled, sharing a pot of watery soup. No one talks about the battle, or the junction, or the road ahead. They talk about little things, a song remembered from childhood, the smell of gumbo back home, the first snowfall they ever saw. Small memories, warm ones, anchors in a world of frost. One man hums a tune, soft, low, drifting. Another closes his eyes, head tilted back, letting the steam from the soup warm his face. You feel the weariness in them, bone deep, quiet, persistent. But you also feel something else, still burning beneath the layers of exhaustion. Resolve, the kind that does not fade, the kind that does not break, the kind that moves armies forward, even when the world feels frozen. Snow begins to fall again, soft, steady, endless. The night grows colder, and the Panthers sleep, inside their tanks, beside small fires, under the indifferent winter sky, ready for the next road, the next village, the next test. because the war is far from over, and they are far from finished. Chapter 7. A Fire That Refuses to Go Out. The Bravery of Sergeant Rivers. The wound that would not stop him. The morning begins in silence, not the gentle silence of snowfall, but the heavy kind, the kind that follows violence and lingers in the air, like a memory that refuses to fade. You stand beside a battered Panther tank. Its hull is streaked with frozen mud, its side plate dented where shrapnel grazed it. Steam rises from the engine grills, mixing with the frost in slow, ghost-like spirals. Inside, the crew moves quietly, a metal clank, a soft cough, the muted scrape of boots against steel. In the distance, the fields are pale and endless, a winter ocean of frost and ruined farmhouses. And somewhere beneath the stillness, you feel it, the weight of a man pushing himself farther than his body wants to go. Sergeant Ruben Rivers, injured the previous day, his leg torn by shrapnel from a German anti-tank round, stands outside his tank as though nothing happened. The bandage wrapped around his thigh is clean, but the skin beneath it burns with pain. He leans slightly on his good leg, just enough for someone observant to notice, not enough for anyone to question his resolve. A medic approaches him cautiously. "You need evacuation," the man says softly, voice careful in the cold. "You shouldn't be on your feet. Not like this." Rivers doesn't argue. He doesn't raise his voice. He simply looks toward the horizon, toward the road, toward the place where the Panthers must go next, and shakes his head, not out of stubbornness, not pride, purpose. "My tank stays with the line." The medic tries again, hands open, patient, but Rivers steps away, toward the turret, toward his crew, toward the work unfinished. You feel the moment tighten, quiet, sharp, inevitable. This is who he is, a soldier who sees the front not as a place to fear, but as a duty that shapes every breath. And the cold, the pain, the wound, all become small things compared to the responsibility he carries. The road to Fairforest. Orders come down from battalion headquarters. Advance toward Fairforest Ridge. Enemy armor likely entrenched. Expect resistance. The name, Fairforest, is misleading. There is nothing fair about it. Only burned trees, frozen craters, and a ridge scarred by months of retreat and counterattack. The Panthers gather in formation. Engines growl. Exhaust billows into the pale sky. You watch Rivers climb into his tank. Each movement deliberate. Jaw clenched but eyes steady. His crew knows. They've seen the blood on his trousers. They've heard the medic's warnings. But they say nothing. Not out of fear. Out of respect. The column begins to move. Tracks grind into the frozen earth. The tanks advance slowly, methodically, like ships pushing through ice. The world around them seems stripped bare. Trees stand like charred skeletons. Farmhouses lie broken, their roofs collapsed beneath the snow. The wind carries the faint smell of gunpowder, as if the land itself remembers too much. You walk beside the lead tanks until the road narrows, forcing all movement into a single column. Somewhere ahead, beyond the white haze, the enemy waits. Rivers' voice crackles over the intercom. calm, steady, focused. His injury doesn't touch his tone, not even slightly, and you realize the wound is not the defining element of this day. His will is. The ambush at the orchard. Just past noon, the column reaches an abandoned orchard, rows of leafless trees standing silent under a blanket of snow. Their black branches extend like skeletal arms, the ground beneath them uneven and treacherous. The tanks slow. Infantry fan out. The air thickens. You feel it. The shift. The warning. Something is wrong. Then the first shot erupts. A German anti-tank gun, camouflaged behind a collapsed barn, fires a shell that screams through the cold, and slams into the lead vehicle. The impact shakes the entire orchard. Snow bursts into the air. A tank jolts backward, treads grinding. The Panthers react instantly. Turrets swivel. Gunners adjust height. Loaders shove shells into breeches with fierce precision. But Rivers sees something the others do not. Through the drifting snow, he catches the faint glint of another gun position, farther left, half hidden behind a cluster of trees, angled perfectly to strike the column's flank. He calls it over the radio, voice sharp but controlled. Enemy piece at 10 o'clock. Second gun. Left ridge. The message cuts through the chaos, like a thread of clarity. Before Bates or the other commanders can react, Rivers pushes his tank forward, ignoring the pain, ignoring the damage to his track, ignoring the open risk. Rivers, hold position. Someone calls through static, but he doesn't, because he knows, if the second gun fires, the column will be torn apart. His tank moves into the orchard, trees scraping the hull, branches snapping against the turret. Snow swirls around the tracks. The enemy gunner sees the movement, shifts aim, fires. The shell misses by inches, slamming into a tree trunk that explodes in a spray of splinters. Rivers doesn't flinch. He orders his gunner to fire. The turret shudders. The shell streaks across the orchard and strikes the hidden gun squarely. The explosion sends smoke billowing into the white sky. The German crew scatters, shouting in panic. You feel the orchard breathe again, as if a held breath has finally been exhaled. But the ambush isn't over. The push into fire. A second wave of German infantry rushes forward from behind a stone wall. On the far side of the orchard, they carry rifles, Panzerfausts, grenades wrapped in cloth against the cold. The Panthers redirect immediately, guns firing in controlled bursts. Infantry drop into firing positions, boots slipping on frozen earth. Voices echo. Left flank. Cover that ridge. Reload. On my mark. The world becomes motion and sound and drifting snow. Inside Rivers' tank. Heat builds despite the freezing air outside. Sweat beads on the back of his neck. Pain pulses through his leg. He bites down on it, not out of denial, but out of the simple need to keep moving. He sees another danger. A German half-track attempting to circle behind the Panthers. Its passengers readying explosives. The orchard becomes a blur as Rivers turns the tank, treads slipping on churned snow. The turret swings. The gunner takes aim. One shot. A clean hit. The half-track erupts in flame. snow melting into black slush around it. The orchard fills with smoke. Snow! Shouts. The metallic scream of ricochets. Yet through it all, you feel a strange kind of stillness in Rivers, not calm in the sense of quiet, but calm in the sense of clarity. He sees what must be done. He does it. Everything else disappears. Bates's dilemma. At the edge of the orchard, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates stands behind a stone fence, field glasses pressed to his eyes. He watches the battle unfold, the smoke, the flashes of fire, the movement of tanks through the trees, and he watches Rivers. He sees the shrapnel wound bleeding through the bandage. He sees the limp when Rivers briefly dismounts to adjust something on the track. He sees the exhaustion tightening the young sergeant's shoulders. He knows what command requires. Pull Rivers out. Replace him. Preserve his life. But he also knows what history demands. Men like Rivers do not appear often, and when they do, the fate of dozens can hinge on their presence. Bates's face hardens, not with coldness, but with grief for a decision already made. He radios the order. Rivers, pull back. Medical evac waiting. Static crackles. A pause. Then Rivers's reply. I can't do that, sir. My tank is holding this line. No arrogance. No drama. Just truth. Bates closes his eyes for a moment. The wind lifts the edge of his coat. Snow gathers on his shoulders. He does not repeat the order. The final advance. By late afternoon, the enemy begins to break. Their gun positions lie shattered, their infantry scattered, their half-tracks burned black in the orchard snow. The Panthers push forward, one slow, grinding yard at a time. Rivers' tank leads the final thrust, even with a damaged track, even with his leg throbbing with each vibration. He sees a group of German soldiers fleeing toward a hedgerow, where another hidden anti-tank gun waits. He moves to intercept, a last act, an essential act. But this time, the enemy fires first. The shell tears into the front of the Panther. A brutal, direct hit. The entire tank jolts. Smoke bursts from the engine deck. The turret slams violently. Inside, the crew is thrown against steel walls. Rivers hits the floor hard, the wound in his leg ripping open again. The tank grinds to a stop. For a moment, everything is quiet, too quiet. Then Rivers forces himself upright, pulling on a handrail, breathing in shallow, painful gasps. He orders his crew to bail out. They do. He stays. Not because he thinks he can fight, not because he imagines survival, but because he refuses to let the second gun fire on the rest of the Panthers. He radios one final warning. Gun at the hedge. Left side. Take it out. Now. His voice is strained, but steady. The Panthers act instantly. Multiple tanks fire at once. The anti-tank gun disappears in a violent burst. The enemy crew scatters into the snow. The line is safe. Rivers made sure of it. A quiet aftermath. When the battlefield finally settles, snow drifts over the orchard, as though trying to erase the violence. Medics rush forward. Infantry move cautiously through the smoke. Rivers is found beside his tank, half sitting, half collapsed, leaning against the hull. His breath is faint, his eyes half open. He has no dramatic last words, no speech, only a slow exhale, visible in the cold for a moment, before fading. The men around him lower their heads, not loudly, not ceremoniously, just quietly, the way respect should sound. Bates stands a few steps away, jaw tight, hands in fists inside his gloves. He knows what Rivers accomplished. He knows what it cost. He also knows the war will demand more from the battalion tomorrow. But for a moment, just a moment, the battlefield seems to pause. The snow falls softly, the orchard breathes, and a single truth settles into the cold air. Some fires go out, others burn forever. Rivers was the latter. Chapter 8. The Winter Push. Towns taken, towns lost. The road after loss. The morning after the orchard feels heavier than any morning before it, not because of the cold, though it bites deeper today, a sharp, lingering cold that slips beneath scarves and gloves, not even because the tanks look battered, coated in soot and frost, but because one seat in the battalion's formation remains empty. You feel it the moment the engines start, a hollow space in the rhythm, a missing note in the low mechanical hum that has carried the Panthers across miles of frozen ground. The men do not speak about Sergeant Rivers. Not directly. Not yet. Grief in war is a private thing, held close, kept quiet, folded into the movements of the day. They honor him not with words, but with the way they climb into their tanks, the way they check every shell, every lever, every bolt, exact, precise, unbroken. Lieutenant Colonel Bates watches from the roadside, hands behind his back, coat stiffened by a night of frost. His gaze moves across the column, slow, deliberate, and when he reaches the place where Rivers' tank should be, he lingers for a moment, not long, just long enough. Then he gives the order to move out. The engines rise in a low, unified growl. Snow scatters beneath the tracks. The Panthers roll forward, into another day of winter, another stretch of road, another test of endurance. The war does not pause for morning, but the men carry him with them, all the same. The town of blackened brick. By mid-morning the battalion reaches a place, marked on maps only as a dot with a faded name, Saint Hilaire. The tanks crest a ridge, and the village appears in a shallow valley below, a cluster of blackened brick, chimneys toppled, doors swinging from broken hinges. Smoke still rises from one corner of town, thin and grey, not new, not fresh, the last breath of a fire that burned days ago. You can smell it before the wind shifts. Charcoal, wet timber, something sharper beneath. The echo of destruction lingering in the air. Infantry approach first, boots crunching on frost, rifles steady. The tanks hold position, their turrets swiveling in slow arcs, watching windows, alleys, shadows. Saint Hilaire is empty. Furniture lies abandoned in the street. A bicycle lies bent beside a well. Frozen laundry hangs on a line, shirts stiff as wooden boards. You step into the square, where a fountain once stood. Now the basin is full of ice, cracked in a spiderweb of fractures. War has taken nearly everything here, except the cold. The Panthers advance cautiously. The town may be deserted, but the land beyond it is not. And as they move through the rubble, the radio crackles. Movement east of the ridge, possibly armored. The rest doesn't need to be said. Saint Hilaire is not a destination. It is a threshold. Another town waits ahead. Another road. Another fight. The ridge of drifting smoke. The ridge to the east rises like the spine of some ancient creature, its slopes covered in slabs of frozen mud, and the blackened stumps of trees. Wind cuts across the crest with a sharp, steady rhythm. Snow drifts sideways, making the sky look like a shifting tapestry of white and gray. You watch the Panthers climb in staggered formation, their tracks chewing into the slopes. Infantry trails closely, heads down against the wind. Halfway up the ridge, the first shell hits. It lands short, a burst of dirt and snow that sprays into the air. Harmless but deafening. Another follows, closer, and then a third. Directly behind the last tank in the column, the ground shakes. Snow cascades down the slope. The men grit their teeth, grip their weapons tighter, push forward. On the crest, the Germans wait, silhouettes behind rows of rocks, machine guns set against tripods, mortars tucked into makeshift pits. It is not a full defensive line, not a fortress, just a determined group, trying to slow the inevitable advance. The Panthers crest the ridge, turrets turning like watchful eyes. Bates gives a short, clipped order. Push them back, and the valley below erupts. The tanks open fire, the blasts echoing across the hills. Infantry spread along the crest, rifles cracking in precise rhythm. Machine gun tracers stitch the ridge. Mortar tubes belch smoke. Snow and dirt leap into the air with every impact. You see enemy soldiers dive behind rocks, shifting positions in desperate zigzags. Their breath fogs in the cold, vanishing instantly. The Panthers advance slowly, methodically, shells slamming into enemy cover. With measured cadence, the ridge becomes a veil of drifting smoke and shattered stone. After 20 minutes, the enemy breaks, slipping back toward a forest line, shadows melting into shadows. The ridge belongs to the Panthers. But the day does not yield. The town that fights back. Beyond the ridge lies another village, Villers-en-Bas, a place larger than Saint Hilaire, its church still standing, its rooftops intact beneath layers of snow. But something feels wrong as the battalion approaches. Doors are shut, windows shuttered. No figures move in the streets, not even the stray dogs that roam so many abandoned towns. The Panthers halt at the outskirts. Infantry creep forward. The air grows still, too still, and then a shot rings out from a second-story window. A single bullet. Precise. Deliberate. A soldier drops. Cry absorbed by the wind. The silence shatters. From attics, from barns, from alleys, German soldiers rise. A hidden force left behind to slow the Allied advance. The Panthers fire smoke rounds, white clouds billowing between houses. Infantry dive for cover, moving in pairs, advancing one wall at a time. Inside the tanks, the crews work by instinct. Elevation 2 degrees. Loader ready. On target. Fire. Shells slam into reinforced doorways. Stone cracks. Timbers splinter. Enemy fire pours from windows. Bullets ricocheting off tank armor. In sparks that look like tiny fireworks, the town fights back, with the desperation of those who know retreat is no longer an option. You follow the Panthers as they push down the main road, snow swirling around them. One tank takes a hit to the side. A Panzerfaust fired from behind a broken cart. The hull dents, but the armor holds. Infantry surge forward, neutralizing the position, block by block, street by street. Villazumba becomes a maze of cold and smoke. Finally, as dusk turns the sky to iron, the remaining defenders slip away. Through a narrow forest trail, the village stands quiet, but not grateful, not relieved, only empty, as though exhaling the last breath from a long, agonizing day. Rooms without people. After the fighting, the Panthers bivouac inside the village for the night. They set up in barns, stables, abandoned living rooms where chairs still sit askew. From hurried departures, you enter a house with them, a small place, with low beams and windows rimmed with frost. A pot sits on the stove, soup frozen inside it. A coat lies crumpled near the hearth. A toy carriage rests on the floor, one wheel broken. These small details weigh more than gunfire. They remind the men that every advance passes through the remnants of someone's life. Some sit on crates, warming their hands near a small fire. Others remove boots, revealing socks stiff with ice. One man finds a journal in a drawer near the bed. He reads a few lines, not aloud, but silently, then closes it gently, placing it back where it was. War is loud, but grief is quiet, and the quiet fills the room, like a cold fog. A night of endless snow. Outside, the snow begins again, thick, heavy, relentless. It blankets the wreckage. It softens the footprints. It turns the village white, as if trying to erase the day. The tanks are parked in a row beside the church, their silhouettes black against the falling snow. Engines tick softly as they cool. Men sleep sitting up, wrapped in blankets, backs against walls. Some talk in murmurs, words floating like faint smoke. Others lie awake, eyes open, listening to the wind claw at the shutters. The cold deepens, squeezing into bones, curling around the edges of dreams, and somewhere in the silence, you feel the ache of those who are missing, the ones who should be here, but aren't. Rivers is one of them, but there are others too. Names not etched in history books, faces the world will never know. The Panthers carry them quietly, each memory held in the spaces, between breaths and footsteps. The snow keeps falling, the night grows heavier. Sleep comes like a thin, fragile gift. Tomorrow, another town awaits, another ridge, another long, frozen push, because the war has not finished with them, and they have not finished with the war. Chapter 9. The Final Push, Toward Liberation and the End of the Long Winter. Dawn on the Edge of Change. The next morning arrives without color. A pale, muted light glows behind thick clouds, barely enough to reveal the broken rooftops and the worn tracks carved into the snow. Frost clings to shingles, to door frames, to tank hulls stiffened by another night without warmth. You stand beside the Panthers as they prepare to move again. Bootsteps echo softly between houses. Engines cough awake, then settle into their familiar low growl. The men look tired in a way that exists only in war, a weariness not of the body alone, but of the soul. Yet their movements remain sharp, trained, certain. They tidy their gear, tighten straps, wipe frost from periscopes with small, efficient motions. Some exchange glances, not smiles, not words, just the quiet understanding that they are close now, close to something shifting, close to something turning, close to a moment that has been building since the day they stepped off the train in Louisiana. Bates walks the line, checking each crew, his breath rising in thin white clouds. Today's objective is simple on paper and brutally difficult in reality. Advance through 3 villages, hold the final ridge, break open the road to the border. This is the last wall of winter, the last barrier before the front lines begin to crumble outward, and the Panthers stand at its threshold. The Village of Shattered Light. The first village on the map is called Beaulieu, a name that once meant beautiful place. War has carved that beauty away. As the battalion approaches, the sun pushes faint gold through the clouds, lighting the ruined houses, as though trying to restore something. The world is not ready to give back. Tanks move cautiously through the narrow lanes. Infantry follows in their wake, eyes scanning windows for the slightest flicker of movement. The snow here is deep, dunes rising against doorways, street signs half buried. Smoke hangs low near the rooftops, making the town feel like a dream abandoned mid-sentence. You hear a distant dog bark, somewhere behind a collapsed barn. Its voice carries through the cold, like a question no one can answer. The Panthers find no enemy here, only silence, and the desolate residue of a place that has endured too much. A pot sits frozen on a doorstep. A child's boot rests beneath a broken window. A stack of firewood stands neatly arranged beside a house that no longer has a roof. The men feel the weight of the place as they pass through. You see it in how they walk, slower, careful not to disturb. What remains? At the far end of the village, a windmill stands crooked. Its blades turn slightly in the breeze, creaking, as if insisting the world must move forward, whether it is ready or not. And the Panthers do. A river of ice and iron. Beyond Beaulieu lies an open stretch of fields, cut by a small river, its surface frozen in layers of glass-like ice. Radio reports warn of mines. On the far bank, enemy infantry hidden in trenches that weave through the snow like buried scars. Bates orders a halt. Engineers move forward, boots crunching in rhythm, poles tapping the ground almost musically. The river groans under thin sheets of ice. As they approach, the sound is eerie, like the land itself murmuring. The panthers wait. Engines rumble. Treads steaming in the cold air. You feel the tension rise. But not in a chaotic way. It rises slowly, like water filling a basin. Then a signal. The crossing is clear. The tanks move one by one, tracks pressing cautiously against the frozen river surface. Ice fractures beneath their weight, but holds. Across the river, the world changes. The snow is deeper, the wind harsher, the sky more severe. In the distance, small flashes spark along the ridge. Enemy fire, testing the panthers' approach. Infantry take cover. Machine guns rattle from the far bank. Tracers flicker across the pale horizon. The panthers answer with calm precision. Shells arc through the cold sky, landing with muffled impacts that send plumes of snow billowing. The firefight lasts 10 minutes, maybe less, maybe more. Time stretches in combat, elastic and unreliable. When it ends, the ridge falls quiet. The road ahead opens. But the hardest part still waits deeper in the winter. The battle for Mont d'Aube. The second village, Mont d'Aube, sits atop a low rise, surrounded by hedgerows and narrow lanes that twist like frozen veins. Enemy forces are dug in here, determined to hold the high ground. The panthers approach from the west, using the hedges as cover. The first shots ring out. As soon as the lead tank rounds the bend, machine gun bursts tear through branches. Mortars thud into the snow. Small arms fire echoes between stone walls. The panthers push forward, carefully, silently, their turrets scanning every rooftop. Inside one tank, the crew's breath fogs the interior, dripping down the steel walls. In narrow lines, the loader wipes frost from shells. Before slotting them into the breach, the commander gives short, controlled orders. Left alley, building with the green shutters. On my mark, the gunner fires. The old stone house shudders, dust and snow exploding outward. Infantry sweep through the street, moving cautiously, boots slipping on compacted ice. Then a sudden burst of fire. From behind a stone well, an enemy squad. Hidden, disciplined, waiting. The panthers pivot. A single blast clears the position. The air fills with smoke and frost. Snowflakes spiral through the haze, like drifting fireflies. The village yields block by block, its defenders retreating toward the far ridge. But the panthers do not pursue recklessly. They move with the patience of men who know the terrain is as dangerous as the bullets. After an hour, Mont d'Aube is secured. Infantry gather near the well, sharing water, catching their breath. A French farmer emerges from a cellar, face hollow but eyes bright with gratitude. He whispers a single line in cracked English. "Merci. You keep us alive." The men nod softly. Then the battalion moves again. The last ridge of winter. The final objective of the day appears as a jagged line of dark trees against the winter sky. The ridge is steep, its sides covered in ice. its crest fortified with trenches and guns. If the Panthers take this ridge, the road to the border opens. If they fail, the entire front line slows. The snow thickens. As they approach, big flakes, heavy flakes, flakes that blur vision and dampen sound. The world feels muffled, wrapped in winter's indifferent embrace. Halfway up the slope, enemy artillery begins to fall. Shells burst in deep, bone-shaking thuds. Trees snap, earth churns, snow explodes into towering clouds. The Panthers respond, advancing in staggered formation, guns firing rhythmically, each shot measured. Inside the tanks, the temperature rises quickly. Sweat and frost mix on helmets. Breath fogs the viewports. Infantry crawl through icy depressions, rifles tucked close. Faces roar from wind. The ridge becomes a white-grey blur of motion, shadows running, flashes of fire, smoke drifting like torn cloth. Then the decisive moment arrives. A German anti-tank gun, hidden beneath a fallen tree, fires a round that narrowly misses the lead Panther. The crew pivots instantly. The gunner fires. The shot finds the target. The explosion sends a wave of heat rolling through the snow. The momentum shifts. Bates gives a final order. Advance. Finish it. The Panthers surge forward, treads grinding ice to powder, turrets firing in disciplined bursts. Enemy trenches collapse. Machine gun nests fall silent. Infantry surrender. The ridge is theirs. And winter, for the first time in weeks, feels like it loosens its grip. The border in sight. From the crest, the landscape opens into a wide, snow-covered plain. In the distance, thin rivers wind through valleys. Towns dot the horizon, their rooftops glowing faintly. In the late afternoon light, somewhere beyond those hills, lies the border, a new front, a new chapter. But for a moment, the Panthers simply stand on the ridge, tanks cooling, breath rising in white clouds, faces lifted toward a sky that looks almost like spring. Not yet, not soon, but closer, much closer. You can feel it too, a subtle shift in the air, as though the world itself is exhaling after holding its breath for too long. The men say little, but in their silence, you hear everything: the exhaustion, the pride, the weight of losses carried, the quiet fire that keeps them moving. The ridge behind them is a scar. The road ahead is a promise. And for the first time in weeks, the snow doesn't feel hostile. It feels like a blanket, laid gently across a wounded land. Epilogue: the long echo of a winter road. You return to the clearing where the story began. Not the real clearing, not the frozen Belgian forest, or the shattered towns, or the orchard where courage burned so quietly, but the clearing memory makes, when it wants to honor something. The air here is different, softer. War's breath no longer lingers. A wind moves gently through the trees, rustling branches with a calm that feels nearly impossible. After everything you've witnessed, you stand where the Panthers once stood, men young and old, tired and unyielding, ready for whatever winter demanded of them. But now there is no rumble of engines, no smell of oil or gunpowder, only the light sound of wind, and the faint crackle of leaves underfoot. Time has lifted the weight of battle from this imagined place, yet its echoes remain, not loud, not haunting, just present, a low vibration in the ground, a whisper in the tree-line, a reminder of the path they carved through a world that doubted them, until doubt had no ground left to stand on. You imagine the tanks, not the machines of war, but the homes they became, small metal rooms, where breath condensed on the walls, where hands were burned on engine blocks, where food was scarce, sleep rarer, fear constant. You imagine the voices inside those turrets, the quiet jokes, the whispered prayers, the steady counting of shells loaded and shells fired, the moments of silence that felt longer than any night, and you imagine the men walking on roads no map could prepare them for, roads of ice and broken houses, roads of frozen rivers and thick forests, roads where something inside them had to remain warm, even when the world around them felt unbearably cold. More than 80 years have passed. The towns they fought in have been rebuilt. The fields have grown quiet again. Children now play where trenches once carved through the earth. The forests have healed, wood by wood, branch by branch. But the panther's path remains, not in statues, though some exist, not in textbooks, though some tell their story. It remains in something quieter, a change in the air, a shift in the soil, a slow recognition. That courage can be forged in silence, that dignity can endure frost and fire, that strength sometimes appears in the lives the world expected the least from. You think about Sergeant Rivers, not in the way a monument might, cold, carved, heroic, but in the way a human heart does, softly, with a tug of grief and gratitude, with a sense of loss, and a sense of awe. You picture him standing in that orchard, injured, breathing hard, snow clinging to his uniform, refusing to step back, because stepping back would let someone else fall. History remembers him as a hero, but heroism, when it happens, never feels that way. It feels like necessity, duty, a quiet certainty that doing what is right cannot wait for safe conditions. You think about Bates too, the commander who saw his men clearly, who trusted them when the world would not, who carried the weight of their successes and their losses in equal measure. Leadership is often loud in movies, but in reality, it is quieter, a steady hand on a shoulder, a patient word, a silent acknowledgement that trust is a responsibility, heavier than any weapon. You take a slow breath. The clearing grows dimmer as clouds weave across the sky. Light softens, shadows stretch, everything feels like it is preparing to rest. And in this quiet, you feel something shift inside you, a recognition that stories like this are not meant to rouse or thrill, but to settle into the mind, like a slow-falling snow, layer upon layer, until they become part of the landscape within. Maybe that is why you came here, not to witness heroics, but to witness endurance, not to stand in awe, but to stand in humility before the lives that reshaped a winter front and a country that had not yet learned to give them the respect they had always deserved. A breeze moves through the clearing again. You feel it brush your cheek, like the soft turning of a page. Somewhere far away, a bird calls once, and falls silent. You look toward the horizon, a pale line between earth and sky, and you sense the long road they traveled, stretching out in front of you too. Not the road of war, but the road of memory, a road that continues, as long as someone walks it with quiet steps, and listens to what still echoes there. The light fades, the air cools, even the trees seem to rest, and when you finally turn to leave, you carry something with you, not a burden, not a sadness, but a kind of stillness, a recognition of what strength looks like when it moves through the world, without shouting, a strength like theirs, a strength that does not need to be loud, to be unforgettable. The fire that stayed quiet. The road from the Ardennes is empty now. Snow softens the tire tracks that once carried thunder. The forests are still, the same trees that once bent under shellfire now holding only wind and birdsong. You stand in the silence that follows courage, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but lingers in the air long after the noise has gone. The men of the 761st fought their war in two directions: forward, against the enemy, and backward, against the disbelief that followed them from home. They were told they could not lead, and so they led. They were told they could not fight, and so they fought until the world ran out of doubt. They were told they would never be remembered, and yet here you are, remembering. You walk along a field somewhere in Belgium, the snow shallow, the horizon wide. Under the earth, metal still sleeps, rusted treads, broken shells, pieces of history the soil has learned to cradle. A boot buckle, a piece of dog tag, an echo of their laughter in the bitter cold. The air tastes faintly of iron and smoke, but beneath it lies something softer: pride. Sergeant Ruben Rivers is gone, but the steadiness he carried remains. His tank was hit. He was ordered to fall back. He refused. He fought on, his leg shattered, his will intact, leading his men through the fog until the line held. He did not survive the day, but the day survived because of him, and that, perhaps, is how history is really written, not in ink or medals, but in choices made when no one is watching. The 761st kept moving after him, from the Battle of the Bulge to the gates of Germany, their red-bordered panther patch glinting against the snow. They liberated towns that didn't know their names and freed prisoners who had never seen men who looked like them. They kept their heads high even when some of those they rescued looked at them with the same prejudice they had endured all their lives. Because heroism does not wait for permission. It simply does what must be done. You can picture them now. The crew inside the Sherman tank, cramped and sweating, engines growling beneath their boots. The gunner whispering range adjustments through the headset. The driver gripping the controls until his knuckles burn. The commander's voice steady over the static, calm as prayer. Outside, the white fields of Europe stretch like an unwritten page. Inside, the story is already being written, in steel, in breath, in resolve. When the war ended, they returned to a country that celebrated victory but not equality. No parades, no fanfare, just long roads and quiet homes that did not yet understand the price of their freedom. But they carried their pride differently, not as anger, but as truth. because they knew that what they had done could not be undone by ignorance. They had proved something larger than war. They had proved themselves to the world, and more importantly, to themselves. Years later, the recognition came, late, partial, but real. Awards, medals, words like valor and honor, finally spoken aloud. But none of those things could match the weight of what they had already known on the battlefield. That courage, once shown, never fades. It becomes part of the landscape, part of the wind that moves through these quiet fields, part of the story that refuses to stop being told. You look across the snow again. The sun is low, gold on white, soft as forgiveness. You imagine them walking here, helmets off, smiling, exhausted. Men whose strength was never measured by hate, but by restraint. Men who carried 2 wars and still found room for dignity. Men who stood against cold, steel, and injustice, and somehow remained human through it all. You breathe in. The air is sharp, honest, clean. You exhale, and for a moment, it feels like your breath joins theirs, a small tribute carried upward into the still sky. The sound of engines returns only in memory, the hum that once divided the world now fading into peace. Thank you for listening. You've been part of Echoes of War, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.